Welcome to the official Beast Lab. Today in studio, we have Andrew Apt, owner of Absolute Strength in New Rochelle. One of the best strength coaches I've come across, especially in the physical realm with lacrosse players. He's starting to become known as the guy to go to in the Westchester area for lacrosse face-off guys in particular. I want to welcome you to the studio to make it official in the official Beast Lab, man.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Excited to be here. This is we've been talking about this for a while. It's been a long time in the works, so I'm excited to really get into it today and talk about lacrosse and everything involved with strength conditioning.
Yeah, man. So the idea behind this official Beast Lab was to bring people like yourselves on here, demonstrate your knowledge, show the way you train athletes in general, but obviously a lot of lacrosse players are going to be paying attention to this. So I wanted to start with the program that you and I designed together, Absolute Beasts. We did it this past summer. I think we had 12 face-off guys come in, high school guys. They trained for 90 minutes with your strength guys, and then they took face-offs with me afterwards. What did you think of that 12-week progression, or was it 8 weeks? 8-week progression.
8 weeks. 8 weeks, and I think we ran like another 6-week program after that. It was great. Yeah. We had a lot of guys that didn't have a ton of weight room experience, especially coupled with the face-off combo. As you know from your past training, you always love to train kind of while you were tired, so that when you're actually on the field, you're able to execute really well, especially under fatigue. And the combination of the two I thought was really excellent. You got the best of one. We were starting to really introduce these guys into some serious, actual progressive training that was structured and programmed and linear. It wasn't randomized. And then they got the best of both worlds with the face-offs immediately after. And a lot of those guys, while you won't necessarily see the biggest strength gains in that little phase there, they're still coming from that. And they have seen tremendous progress since. So I think it was an excellent and a great first way to kind of start this partnership in a very unique program.
I agree. I also think that, there's like you said, the physical part of it, the mental part of it. Like I said, I always like to train my face-off technique work when I was tired at the end of a workout or whatever, especially when I was lifting at my own gym after when I became pro, when I wasn't in college anymore. The idea of having the fourth quarter face-off mindset, I thought that helped a lot with my mental game. When I would go into a game and I'd see the other opponent start to get tired, it would almost make my game go up. And I think when we looked at the kids from around that 6-week period, you really start to see them mature and turn a corner where they weren't walking in and wondering what you were sending them. They were walking in and attacking it. And I thought that was really cool. And I think that also helps with the face-off guys, because in our position, we talk about attack or defense. Attackman can get de-twigged, or he could throw the pass away 5 times in a game. But then if he scores 2 goals, he's the man. In face-offs, it's very simple. You either lose face-off or you don't. And you're either a hero or, everyone's making fun of you after the game. There's nowhere to hide. So I like that mentality, and that's what always kind of worked with me synergistically with strength training, was there's nowhere to hide. You either did the work or you didn't. So when you look at a face-off guy coming in, and say that I am new to the position, I'm just learning to get the technique work down, but I also want to learn how to lift correctly. What would be my first steps as a new athlete in getting into the weight room and starting my own process?
Well, your first steps to this, right? You look at the face-off position in comparison to a lot of people that are on 2 feet at all times, always standing upright. It's very different. It's a weird position.
Yeah.
Okay. The first thing is you need basic work capacity. Right, like a lot of one thing I find that drives me nuts. I find a lot of face-off kids are like, I don't need to do any type of conditioning. I don't really need to, work on any general work capacity because I'm on and off the field. Well, if you're doing your job properly and your team is scoring a lot of goals and you're winning a lot of face-offs and you're running on and off the field, well, you need work capacity, right? If you're winning that ball and you're making a fast break, okay, and either you're scoring or you're giving to attackman or when you're midi, whatever it may be. Okay, if you're doing your job, which hopefully you are, you need to be in shape. Yeah. So the first things we look at is building general work capacity for the athlete. I'm not worried about specificity of worrying about specific movements or teaching you how to be an amazing Olympic lifter. I'm looking to see general strength increase, relative strength, can you move your body weight, and then your ability to rotate and sprint, right? It's kind of 4 things I really look at. Can we get up off the ground and run? Can we, rotate on the ground and run? And then at the same time, like, how well are we able to explode from that position? Because it's really a super explosive, very fast switch movement. And we find a lot of kids really struggle with basic principles, yet they want to dive into a seriously complex program. So my advice to someone first coming into the weight room that is first trying to start a weight training program or really try to elevate their game is let's master the basics first. Can you do pull-ups?
Yeah.
All right. Can you squat your body weight? Can you bench your body weight? Can you do a deadlift properly? Can you hinge? And can you rotate? What do your hips look like? And you might not know if you rotate properly, okay? But it's pretty easy to find out with some very basic movements. So master the principles of basic strength training first, and then dive into something a little bit more complex.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think a lot of times, I know I was a victim of it when I was in high school. You have a Men's Health or Men's Fitness magazine. You think you know what you got to do. All you got to do is copy what this guy who, he does a little bit more than just the workout he's telling us. I'm just going to copy this for 6 weeks and I know everything I need to do. And what's the body part, split? Chest on Monday, back on Tuesday, legs on Wednesday. We might miss Wednesday. Thursdays, shoulders, Fridays, arms. So you have all these kids who think bigger muscles makes you a better athlete. And I have athletes right now who are telling, Coach, I can bench 225, I can do this and that. And that's great, but that's not a face-off. A face-off is a totally different thing. And I also think a lot of kids, like you said, I don't need to be in condition because it's just about how fast are my hands. How do you think you get from here to the sideline, dog? You're not just going to pick the ball and then levitate over to the sideline. So I think sprint endurance, at least for me, sprint endurance was always my key to success. So I worked on my mobility. Well, I wasn't that good at mobility. I didn't focus on that. I thought flexibility for much of my younger career was the same as mobility. So I was stretching all the time, right? But I wasn't really working on the joint mobility. And then I would focus on sprint endurance. So my thought was, if I can do 30 sprints in a game, that if I can sprint on and off on a field 30 times in a game, then I'm going to be good. And that was kind of my mindset. I think a lot of these kids, like you said, they don't think they need to have that endurance. Or they think that their conditioning is, I can run 5 miles. So if you ran 5 miles in a lacrosse game, something went terribly wrong.
Yeah, and that's totally true. And honestly, one of the biggest issues I have personally with, and this is not to knock our lacrosse coaches locally or sports coaches in general, is the general misunderstanding of what is conditioning, right? Now we can talk about becoming much more game specific. Yeah. What energy systems are we looking at? What's our time domain like? Listen, I've got a soccer player, okay? A mile test for a soccer player is going to be much more relevant than for a face-off guy.
Yeah.
Or for my quarterback, right? Or for a lineman when we're talking about football here, right? We're talking 10 seconds, 15 seconds, maybe we're on for a little bit at max. So we're looking at, short, high-intensity, interval-based training, with proper time domains for rest, right? We want repeatable efforts over time.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I look at specifically the conditioning piece, okay, if I've got a kid that can do, say he can do 10, 50-yard sprints in X amount of time, but by the time he gets to rep number 5, his time starts to decrease. Well, that's when you start to really play with the idea of, okay, so we need X amount of rest now to be able to keep that interval, that working interval the same, right? We don't want to see drop-offs. We want to see consistent work because over the course of the game, if you can consistently win, you're going to win.
Yeah.
If you consistently lose, well, you have a problem. Either they're better than you, or you're not in shape, or you haven't practiced enough.
Yeah.
And like you said, there's nowhere to hide. You either can do it or you can't do it. The clock doesn't lie.
Yeah, that's a great point. I remember when I was at Penn State, my first year, we ran a 2-mile loop, 3 times a week. And what did we have? We had a lot of guys with shin splints. We had a lot of guys like myself who were like, look, I just can't run long. I'm not built for it. My knees hurt, blah, blah, blah. 2 years later, we handed over the strength and conditioning to our strength and conditioning coach. And the concept for our test out that year was you ran a 40, you got your clock, then they added, I think, 0.3 of a second to it, and then you had to run 14 40s with a 3-to-1 work to rest ratio.
Yeah, exactly.
And you had to make all 14. And I'll tell you what, we were in shape and we had almost no injuries. That was the best. That was when it really started to click for me when I was in college, how cool the science of all this is. And I actually changed my major immediately from phys ed to kinesiology, movement science after that, because I was like, this dude has the coolest job ever. He can tweak a couple things and he just changed everybody's lives on this team.
Yeah, you gotta look at bang for your buck is what I like to call it. Where am I gonna get the greatest stimulus in the least amount of time? Oftentimes I get an hour. Maybe I get an hour and a half. with these athletes. And that includes our movement-based training, which are speed and agility. It includes our lifting, and it includes our conditioning at the end. Or sometimes I'll do conditioning in the beginning. I'm working with a couple of your guys right now, and we condition in the beginning every time. And that conditioning is also relates to our speed and agility work, right? Like our conditioning may actually be our linear speed work that day. We have the ability now to do 30-yard sprints on our other side. And so I have the luxury of having a lot more space in those places. Yeah. So, or doing, sled sprints or banded sprints. Well, there's a lot of conditioning that goes in there. It's just a matter of how you play with those time domains. But, when I look at time and the amount of time I have with the athlete and what can I get the most bang for my buck out of in that short period of time, it's oftentimes, shorter, more intense work intervals, whether that's with our weight training or it's with our conditioning or whatever it may be. More often than not, that's how we look at it.
Yeah. And now if I'm a high school kid, because the hardest thing I think is to convince kids to go and get their sprint work in on their own. It's easy to get a kid to go in there and do his back day. So how can I as an athlete, say I'm in high school and I want to start taking strength training seriously, how do I start to incorporate some conditioning work on my own without making it feel like, oh, today's a run day, like I'm probably gonna just go home and watch TV instead? Like how do you incorporate it into your lifting so that it's easier for them to get it in?
That's a good question. And there's no one simple answer for it because, listen, I was a high school athlete at one point in time too. And even, I played pretty high level college sports, and even then I was like dragging my ass to go over to the turf field to go do sprints. And there was a few times where like I paid for it and I go, well, that's because you didn't put the work in. Yeah. You got to find a way to make it fun. And you got to find a way to really fit that into your program. For me, like I always found that if I knew that I was going to go and for an hour do sprint work, wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
But I knew that if I had a 15 or 20 minute window 3 times a week where all I had to go do was these 5 things, get it done, get it over with, and then go to the gym, that was always much more successful. And I find the same thing for my athletes, whether they're middle school or college. I have a lot of kids that we train that leave, they go to school, and they always call, hey, coach, can I get some sprint work? Hey, coach. Our sessions oftentimes don't last longer than 20, 30 minutes, max. And that's for my higher level guys.
Yeah.
It beats you up a bit. You're tired. And then oftentimes when you're on your own, training on your own, you kind of fall off. And you only get so much for so long. Yeah. And it also depends on the person, right? You have to know yourself as an athlete. If you know that your attention span is for 10 minutes, well, then work for 10 minutes. You're not going to get that much out of it in 10 minutes. But it's a lot more than you're going to get if you don't do anything at all.
Yeah.
So, for the high school athlete, you got to find a way like, do you enjoy it? Is it fun? If not, how do we make it so it's something you enjoy? And then do you have goals, right? Like I think just going and running sprints without anything for it to stick to
no way.
is tough. But if I know that, okay, like this is my 40 time, or this is, I can do, 300 meter repeats in this time, or whatever your goal may be, if you're able to set something tangible that you can actually see yourself working towards, that's the most helpful thing.
Yeah, when I was a trainer in New York City, I always told my clients that intensity was more important than the duration of the session.
Agreed.
So whenever, like you said, like if I'm going to work as hard as I can, that's way more important than screwing off at the gym for 3 hours and telling everybody I spent all day at the gym. So when you talk about the sprint work, I always used to try to come up with ideas that were quick. Like for myself, when I was training for my final year at PLL, I would lift and then I would just go out here to my driveway and I would just do sprint and then jog back down and sprint. And then I would do like, okay, this week I'm doing 6 after every workout, and then next week I'm doing 7, because there has to be some kind of progression. And that's the common theme when I talk to athletes. There has to be a progression. You've seen, crazy stuff out there, muscle confusion, change your workout every single day. If there's nothing for your body to progress on, then you're not actually getting better at anything. So if there isn't a specific amount of time that you can actually progress, then so kids will ask, how do I progress? A lot of guys think it's more weight. Yeah, that's load progression is important, but you also have volume progression, and you also have interval progression where you are going to cut your rest times down. And I tell guys, if you're looking at conditioning, you could turn a deadlift session into conditioning if you just cut your rest periods. Every week I'm going to cut my rest periods by 3 seconds. Next thing you know, you're doing the same weight, but you're doing it with almost no rest. Dude, your work capacity is way up.
Oh, absolutely. And look, like, I looked at something like, for example, the sport of CrossFit, which for those of you that don't know, I own a CrossFit gym, as well as a performance center. I hated CrossFit with a passion about 5 years ago. I was a very competitive powerlifter. I was very strong. And I went and played rugby for the first time in a long time. And I'm like, man, I have zero work capacity.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't fun. I can't breathe.
Yeah.
And so, I dabbled with the idea. I'll fool around with it a little bit. And while CrossFit's got a really bad rap for really poor coaching, which, by the way, still happens very frequently, and that bad reputation is totally understood by me, if done really well, it's a very effective tool. And those people really are the fittest people on earth, and it's amazing what they can do. Now, I take some of the similar principles from that, time domains, you have X amount of time to get this work done. But we look for a couple things, right? Like the intensity of the effort, the quality of the work. As my intensity or my time increases or decreases, does my quality of work stay high? Do I start to fall apart physically? And you're able to really manipulate the body and the intensity of your session by simply changing the amount of time you have to work, or your rest periods, or your eccentrics, your tempos, right? Everyone thinks that to make something really difficult, you need to add more weight. Mm-hmm. Well, I'll take you and I'll give you 65% of your back squat max, and we can do 3, 4, 5 second tempos. We can do pauses. Yeah. We can add a couple more reps to it.
Those people have probably never done Tabata.
And yeah, and I guarantee you're going to be gassed and you're going to be sore the next day, right? Like the idea that, and this is such a big misconception in this industry, and thankfully it's starting to go away a bit, that you have to always load your body with a ton more weight to get the same effect. It just beats you up.
Yeah.
Right? And listen, I'm all for lifting heavy weights. I do it myself, my athletes do it, but there's a progression to get there. Right? And oftentimes we go through, eccentric phases, isometric phases, concentric phases, where depending on what we're doing, we're manipulating your body to allow you to get to that phase.
Yes.
Right? But it's the initial aspect, going back to when you're first jumping into the weight room, is like, okay, let me look at this and say, all right, I'm going to squat at 90% of my max every single week for 6 weeks. Yeah, you might get a little stronger initially, but down the road, once you're a more trained athlete, that's not going to work anymore.
Plateau
for you.
hard.
You have to change the stimulus.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that I talked about with one of our guests about how when you, like Scott Rogers and I were talking, and Scott is a trainer as well, and we're saying it's so hard to write your own programming as a trainer because you're aware of all these modalities, you're aware of all these different ways to get things done, and you get training ADHD. So you're like, I'll write out a mesocycle and I'll be like, all right, next 3 months, this is what we're doing. And the second workout in, I'm like, you know what, man, I haven't done kettlebell swings in a while. I think I'm going to do 1,000 kettlebell swings a day. And you just never get anything done. It's so hard. That's why for the World Games, I went to Todd Georgi and I was like, you tell me what to do, man. Like, I can't be thinking on my own because I won't get anything done. That's why you and I have talked about coming over and me doing Olympic weightlifting at your spot, because I need somebody to just tell me what to do so I don't get that ADHD.
Look, I mean, I'm the worst at that. I am the definition of ADHD in all aspects of my life. Whether it's like I'm trying to do paperwork and I can't figure out how to organize my desk, or I'm in the weight room and I look over and I go, oh, that would be fun. Like, I haven't done that for a while, just like you said. I have a coach. There's days where I go, why do I do this? This isn't fun. And then I'm like, well, yeah, like that's what all your clients think about you on a regular basis. There's a reason why, right? Like, this is what you're weak at. I totally know what you mean. Yeah. I mean, listen, coaches need coaches. Whether you're the best in the world or you're the most beginner, and the day that you think you're too good for a coach is probably the day you should stop doing what you're doing.
100%.
It's like saying that, like, I can't learn anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Like, no, there's always learning to be done. And I look at the program I'm doing, and it's something that I couldn't write. It's not rocket science, right? Like, training doesn't have to be rocket science. And that's what the people really screw up these days is they try to do too much.
Yeah.
A lot of times less is more.
100%.
Like I said, back to the bang for your buck. What makes me better? And then what is like the Instagram, accessory BS that, isn't going to, at the end of the day, is it going to make me a better athlete? Probably not.
Yeah.
Maybe it'll give you some bigger arms, which everyone likes, don't get me wrong. But what works and what doesn't? And over time, it's been the same things over and over again, no matter which way you turn it.
Yeah. I think when I used to do almost exclusively conjugate periodization with my clients, and I did it as a template because, you had 30, 40 clients and you're training all day, and it's a lot easier to keep track of all that with them when they're doing their progressions with conjugate. And I remember rotating it throughout, we would do 3-month mesocycles, and then we would do a test out at the end of the year. And it was just always interesting because, the way I based it was it's easy when you're training somebody else. So, Andrew comes in, we would always do an assessment. Okay, here's our test out at the end of the year. Here are your numbers. Let's assess for the new year what your goals are. Okay, my goal is to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, my job is to take whatever your physical goals, because I was in the private sector, right? So everything is about, I want abs, or I want to look like this. It's never like, I want to run a 2-minute mile or whatever. So it was like, my job is to take whatever your aesthetic goal is and tweak it into a physical form so that instead of you looking at, I want abs, you're looking at, okay, I need to be able to do a plank for X amount of time, or I need to be eating this many calories every day so I can put it into a tangible format. And it was easy to do it with clients. But then for myself, every year I go, okay, I got a goal for this year. I want to deadlift 600 pounds. Well, guess what? We're pregnant again. We got a second kid. Well, shit. Looks like I'm not deadlifting 600 pounds this year. So now I'm going to start swinging some kettlebells and do that instead. So you mentioned Instagram, which is hilarious because every day I see somebody on Instagram that I actually follow and like what they post. And it makes me second guess what I'm doing with my own program. And I was like, I need to not look at Instagram. Lauren Kansky is like this kettlebell expert who I would love to get on here one day. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, oh, dude, she's doing that split variation with the kettlebell. Maybe I should just dedicate to getting really good at that for the next 6 weeks. It's like, dude, what happened to the program you just wrote for, an entire week?
Yeah, it's like I've had a very interesting last, I'd say, year in multiple regards, and you've kind of seen it the whole way through. We did this massive build out on the other side. The facility is 20,000 square feet now. It's awesome. It's finally done. Thank you, because I don't know how much more I could handle. I didn't have any gray hair until this damn thing happened, but I do now.
It's a miracle we got Andrew here today.
You have no idea. You have no idea. I was living in the gym at one point on an air mattress. Yeah. So anyway, in regards to that, I left. I went to the CrossFit Games, and I compete in CrossFit. I love it. My athletes don't do it. It's you're either a CrossFit athlete or you're doing sports performance. There's two different things. So let's just make that clear. My athletes don't do the CrossFit. They do conditioning aspects of it. But I went to the games and I was like, wow, this is unbelievable. And I'm looking at some of these guys and I'm going, he ain't that much better than me. And I was like, I think it's time for me to make my run. And so for, I'd say, I don't know, maybe it was 8 weeks, I was training twice a day, every day, being coached by one of the best, Jason Layden out of CrossFit Milford. There's a reason why he's got 12 people in the games this year. He's awesome. And I'm like, what am I doing? The likelihood of me making this, it's like me winning the lottery, right? Like it's most likely it can happen. No.
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, you have a business to run. That's what pays your mortgage.
Yeah.
Right? You just made this huge investment, and you're over here working out like 25 hours a week. I did the math. I'm like, this is crazy.
So would you say CrossFit's gotten to a point where the athletes are just, if they're not training full-time for it, then what are you doing if you want to compete?
If you want to compete at the highest level, and you are not full-time, you're not competing at the highest level.
Yeah.
Look, one of my good friends, Will Carter, made the games this year. Fortunately, for a few different reasons, didn't end up going. He'll knock on wood. He should go next year. That guy has I've worked with thousands of athletes at this point in my life. undoubtedly the hardest work ethic I've ever seen at anybody ever. He's a teacher at John Jay High School. He will either wake up before school, he's a phys ed teacher, and train in the gym there, or he'll train like middle day at lunch and then train after football practice, wrestling practice at night, every day. And he never misses it. And there's a reason why he's such a savage.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy is an animal. But and he still gets beaten.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he's a top 100 athlete in the world. You know, he made the games, right? He made that cut, right? But if you're not training like that, you're not at that next level.
Yeah.
There's no way. Not unless you're taking something special.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the real thing.
That is a real
I mean,
thing.
there's a few outliers out there that can get away, and there's a few people that talk about, you know, I only train once a week, or once a day, and I'm making the games. But that's very rare.
Yeah.
And those are usually athletes that compete at the highest level and trained at that 2 times a week rate for years.
Yeah.
And so they have a little bit more of an advantage. But you know, listen, in the Open, I came in like the top 1,000 in the world, right? There's like 250,000 people that do it. It's a very good score.
Yeah.
But I'm 1,000 places away yet from even like really like, you know, being
Competing.
considered. I got to be in the top. You have to be in the top 100.
CrossFit is a sport to me rather than a training, like a system of training. Because I always felt like, and you tell me if I'm wrong, because you understand it more than I do. When I look at your ability to be as fit as possible in general and be good at everything, then it kind of takes away from the specific idea of strength training for an athlete, which is specificity, right? Yes. So like, I'm only a sprinter because I need to be able to sprint on and off the field 30 times a game, and I need to be mobile for the face-off. I would go into a CrossFit gym and I'd get hurt in 10 seconds. So that's my question is, how would you look at CrossFit for a guy who wants to play lacrosse at the collegiate level?
Look, it's so I agree and disagree. Okay. It is totally 100% its own sport. Yeah. Right? And we look at that for like a select group of people. Those that want to use it as sport. Okay? You can take kettlebell. Look at kettlebells. Like that's a sport. There is a sport for it. Now it's a different sport than CrossFit, right? But everything has its own sport. We run several levels of programming in our gym. Level 1, that's sport, right? And that's anybody can do it if you are of that ability. Then we run level 2. That's like, you know, that's like the level below the sport, and level 3 is the most basic version. You know, for example, today we are doing we test every 5 weeks, and then we run a 5-week phase and we retest. And our new testing week today, I believe, was, you know, a 5 rep max power clean, or a hang squat clean, excuse me. Okay, well, if you don't have any business doing that, you're not doing it. Yeah. No, you're not doing it. You're going to do it was 10 reps at like a 50%. Okay, can you do that? Right? Like or you can't do a pull-up. You can't do 5 strict dead hang pull-ups. You're not doing the next phase of like a kipping pull-up or a butterfly pull-up. So in regards to it being accessible to everybody, totally is when done properly. Also will totally destroy you when not done properly, right? So there's the best of both worlds there, and I think that's across the board for strength and conditioning, right? You can have a really great coach that takes you forward. You can also have a really bad coach that just destroys you.
Wants to kill you. Yeah.
It depends on what you're doing and how you're looking at it. In regards to collegiate athletics, do I think that there's carryover for CrossFit to like face-off guys or any type of athlete? Yeah, absolutely. No matter what type of strength conditioning you do, there's going to be some carryover. Do I think that he was probably the fittest guy in all of like, you know, high school lacrosse at the time? Yeah, if he's that good, he's one of the top 3 in the world, top 15. Absolutely. Yeah. Do I think there's guys that he also sounds like he's not your average high school athlete.
No, Christian Gallagher is my size.
Okay, so
and he is a junior in high school.
Yeah, so exactly right. There's better ways to go about your training and strength conditioning. However, there is carryover. Like, he doesn't need to do ring muscle ups. No. He doesn't need to do that. Clean and jerks will help him. Yeah. Deadlifts, squats, pressing, that's going to help him. Benching, that's going to help him. One of my biggest issues, though, and this is very specific to lacrosse, actually it's general, is the lack of 3 planes of movement in CrossFit. Right? Okay. It's very front to back. Mm-hmm. There's very little rotation. Your unilateral work is a lot less than it would be, typically speaking. We do a ton of it because our clients need it and we know the program better than that. But in general, if I were to take a overview of our programming as a CrossFit gym, I think we're talking about my gym, and we looked at what's missing, rotational work. And for your sport, that is one of the most important things.
100%.
Okay, what do we look at face-off guys? Shoulder injuries, elbow injuries, back.
Yep.
Right? Knee. Right? And this is pretty typical across the board, but specifically your position.
It's very unique in face-offs because we're only doing the same thing over and over again. Other than a pitcher in baseball, I can't think of anything where you are, and even in pitching, like the problem with face-offs is because you're right-handed, it has to be done right-handed, it has to be in the same spot every time. You're also dealing with impact from the other opponent.
Totally.
And
that's one of the reasons why, for example, we're working with Colby Baldwin now.
Penn State commit.
Yeah, this guy, he likes him, apparently. Great kid, but when I ran him through some of his baseline testings, I really look in depth at what's our thoracic spine look like and what do our hips look like, right? His ability, I'm trying to think, he's righty. His ability to rotate to the right actually was okay. His ability to rotate left was non-existent.
And he's had a history of low back issues.
Right,
That's one of the biggest reasons I want him to come to you.
And his ability to externally rotate his right knee, great. To externally rotate his right hip, non-existent. And I said, okay, Colby, well, let's look at your body and the way it functions. It's actually coming from your ankles. It's a chain reaction across the board, right? So, like, we need to address this. And it's not something that we can't fix and remedy and change pretty quickly. But your programming is going to be very specific to making you rotate. Now, we're still going to have fun and do our deadlifts, do our squats, do our cleans, things like that. But the accessory work, you might be like, dude, what are we doing? But guess what? His back doesn't hurt.
Dude, the accessory work is more important than anything. I don't care what anybody says.
His back doesn't hurt. He's like, doesn't need to go to PT. He's going to PT 3 times a week, and where they're doing the same things over and over again.
Here's a 3x15 in the corner. Go ahead and do it, and we'll stim you afterwards.
Yeah, let's do band walks, and let's do some pigeon stretch and things like that. Well, that's all great, and there's some PTs. I'm not knocking PTs; they're awesome that understand it and get it. But there's so much old school PT that goes on now that isn't like into, not that the science is new, just the way the body actually flows and functions.
Yeah.
And it's just, I took a quick look, like, okay, well, this is why.
Yeah. Actually, speaking of that, if you haven't seen episode 5 with Mike Stella, go back and watch that right now because Mike Stella goes real deep into that. He had he has like a war on the box PT clinic concept. And
it's, I actually owe my entire career to a PT guy that got me started in it, and he'll remain nameless, but like, even his guys, he's very good, he's very smart, but it's like, it's so old school, and there's so much new information now. I'm like, all right, well, we keep having the same low back problem, and we keep doing the same things to fix it. Maybe we need to take a different approach.
Yeah. Well, I think Mike Stella's point was that real athletic training is held back by the healthcare industry and by the way that you need to financially make money. If I have a PT box clinic and I have 3 people at a time with my physical therapist, that equals a certain amount of money. And then the healthcare industry is like, oh, you need 30 sessions, probably 100. All right, we'll pay for 10. And that's kind of what you get. So it's a rotating door because you get hurt again, you come right back in.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, you're somewhat limited. I mean, listen, there's liberty in what you do with your clients, right? Like, I don't know, I'm not in the back end of that. I'm in the private sector, and I don't deal with insurance. But, there's traditional medicine you get taught in school. Where like, this is how you do movement. And if you're accepting insurance, there's probably some rules and guidelines that's like, these are parameters that like you need to follow. And I don't know if it's a question of insurance or we get paid or what do we call? Are we a cash facility or are we accepting healthcare?
Yeah.
What do we do? And it's a huge limitation. And I agree. I mean, look, I've got a PT that is one of my CrossFit coaches, and she's awesome, and she's super smart. And I'm very happy that she's a PT student right now, but I'm very happy she's working with us because she gets to see a whole different aspect of like, oh wow, there's a few other different ways to to solve that problem.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I mentioned in one of my other interviews, you like to believe that I said, and people in general, whether you're being coached a sport or whether you learn something in college or it's your first job, you love to believe that the first person who taught you something knows everything, right? Mm-hmm. So like when I go to a kid and I try to fix his face-off stance, but he learned from a guy who literally never played in college, he's going to be hesitant, regardless of my resume, because he wants to believe so firmly that what I'm doing is already awesome. I want you to tell me how awesome I am, not I need to move my right foot. And the same thing when it comes to strength training. When I came out of Penn State, we did exclusively HIIT. When I came out of, not fitness industry HIIT, not jumping on Bosu balls, but actual real HIIT training. And I just assumed everything was to failure. Everything was, burnouts, and, we were doing only compound lifts. And when I got into the private sector in New York City and I saw people doing things different ways, I was like, what is this guy doing? He's not even going to failure. I just thought that you couldn't do a set without going to failure. And that if you were doing only an upper body split, or if you were doing a body part specific split during the day, that can't possibly work. It has to be total body, full blown out workouts. And then you start to open your mind and let your ego aside a little bit and realize, like you had said at the very beginning, if you're not still learning, then you probably need to get out of what you're doing because you have given up. Because this is a physical realm and it's science-based, and science is always evolving.
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty about it, right? Like numbers always stay the same, but science is always changing, right? So there's always something to learn. And sometimes, you'll take a course and you go, oh, this is just something else. Like, I can't get behind this. And sometimes you take a course and you go, wow, like, that made so much sense.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, we've got a great guy. He's a very, very unconventional, non-traditional, functional movement specialist.
Okay.
World's longest name.
Fantastic title.
His name's Bob Fanelli. I stole him from a place in Mamaroneck. He rents a spot from me. But he's only one of 6 master trainers in the world at a place called the Gray Institute. And most people haven't heard of the Gray Institute. It's not Gray Cook, with the functional movement screen and things like that.
That's what most people are going to say.
That's what most people think. It's different. It's not the FMS test, which I think has its applications and doesn't have its applications. But I got to learn really on like a very, and I'm still learning, he's such a wealth of knowledge, a very specific joint by joint reaction. Like, how does my mid-tarsal joint in my foot, like when it's collapsed and you have flat feet, how does that affect my knee? How does that affect my hip? How does that affect my shoulder?
Yeah.
How does that affect my elbow? Right? Like, everything's a chain reaction. And he takes you and he puts you through this eval, which is really, it's very eye-opening, right? Oh, I'm a strong guy. I thought I could move pretty well, right? And then he has me doing these things, and I felt like a ballerina. I'm like twisting my body, and I'm moving all over the place, and I'm like falling over. And he's sitting there in the corner, like giggling at me. He's also the nicest guy in the world. So like, you're not sure like if he's laughing at you or he's just like, he's laughing with you. And then he's like, come and look at this. And he'll show you, your big toe is causing this, and this is why. And then he takes out a skeleton, he does the whole thing on the skeleton, and you can see how it moves the different joints. He's like, look, you're actually extremely mobile. You can stand up and lay your forearms on the ground. He's like, but you have no movement in your joints. And that's why your right knee hurts, is your metatarsal joint is frozen, so your feet can't go flat and come into an arch, and that's why you're having your lower left back pain, and X, Y, and Z. And he'll take like your tibia, and in the beginning of the session, he'll rotate your leg, and you'll fly, like spin, and then by the end, your tibia will go like this.
Wow.
And you're like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. It's like, you need to come and work at the gym.
Talk about a dude that I need on this show.
Yeah, I mean, he is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I'll introduce you gladly. I mean, he rents the back office at the space. You'll see him walking around. And the thing is about him is he's totally like, you look at him and he just looks like a normal guy, and then you look at his feet and he wears the Vibrams. And I can't lie, and Bob, if you listen to this, I totally judged your Vibrams initially until I heard you talk about
Most
the feet.
people get judged on the Vibrams.
And I'm like, man, like this guy's wearing toe shoes. And I'm like, wow, like this guy knows what he's talking about. And I for like 2 years, I'm like, how can I get him into the gym? Because he could teach everyone so much.
Yeah.
And it has totally changed the way I look at training.
It's great.
Specifically for my athletes, more than anything. In regards to like different planes of motion and rotation. And I was a very traditional PT guy traditional, like, we kind of train right here, and he opened my eyes to a whole nother world. It's actually crazy.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So now, to wrap up, if I'm an athlete and I'm coming in to work with you, or say I want to, as a face-off guy, I've decided I want to get into strength training, I want to start a program. Say I have a basic knowledge of a squat, deadlift, and bench, so you don't have to teach me from scratch. What should my focus be if I'm starting, let's say, right after this spring season? So say right now it's March, I'm going into my season. I plan on, in June this summer, of really getting after my strength training. What should be my idea and plan? And
are you writing your own plan, or are you coming to see somebody?
I would say...
Because that changes things.
Well, what I would say is, let's assume that I'm going to go to somebody and have a plan written out for me. What would you recommend? Because I always tell people, if you have the financial and time ability, go see an expert to have them write something out for you. But let's say that I'm coming to you and I'm going to work out on my own, and you're going to assess me and give me something that I need to do for the summer.
So essentially, you coming in and you want me to tell you what to do after.
Give me like a basic idea of what you're going to be looking for and what I should be doing.
All right. Well, when I look at you, okay, the first thing we do is we do a movement screen of some sort. So I'm looking, okay, how well do we move? Do we have single leg stability? Can we rotate? What are our performance numbers like? How well do I move side to side in pro agility? What's my 40 time like? How explosive am I, on a vertical or a broad jump? What's my relative strength like? So when I look at you, I'm looking in a very basic sense. I'm not going to look at you necessarily in your max numbers, because that's not appropriate for our first session. That would probably happen in 4 or 5 weeks. When you go home, if I give you a program, it's going to be something specific to what you need to do. So I think that's a whole nother story in itself.
Of course.
But if you are going home and you kind of are like, all right, I got my assessment, I got my numbers, and now I'm going to kind of write myself a program, listen, keep it simple.
Yeah.
Right? We're looking at you have the way you want to structure your workouts is the first part's going to be the most complex, right? Are we doing an Olympic lift? Are we doing a big compound lift, like a deadlift or a squat? And then from there in, you're going to fill in your next exercise, which is going to be your next most complex. Maybe we're going to do a barbell reverse lunge, or we're going to do heavy kettlebell swings, or we're going to do something explosive, a dumbbell snatch, or a landmine, jerk, whatever it might be. And then from there we go into our accessories. So we're looking at 5 exercises. Should take you probably anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half, depending on your ability and the intensity of what you're doing. Okay, and keep it simple, right? You don't need to try to reinvent the wheel. At first, start with a 4x5 or a 3x5. And every week, either you add, a set. So maybe start 3x5 squats the first week. The next week, you go 4x5. The week after, you go 5x5. Okay? And you can mess with that intensity. You can start with a certain weight. The next week, keep it, because you're adding more volume, so you're going to get more stimulus. Okay? You can add a tempo to it. You can add a pause to it. But don't try to get crazy. Don't do all the glory exercises. Keep it simple. Keep it straightforward. And ask your strength coach, okay, if you don't have a plan and you're coming in for an assessment to then go train on your own, all right, what do you think I really need to work on? Okay, great. My vertical power and my ability to, rotate right. Okay, what will help me do that? And ask the question, right? The questions, I've got kids that come in all the time. And it's very rare that I get in-depth questions on why does this happen? Because the more you understand, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, 100%.
So, if I write you a program, that's one thing. It's going to be much more specific than the general population is going to do. But if you're writing your own, you're working on your own, keep it simple. Don't need to crush yourself. Don't need to be in the weight room for 2 hours. An hour intense session, most likely for you, is more than enough.
Yeah.
And, focus on honestly, the king of lifts, your deadlift, okay? All right, I think people really overlook that. Your ability to lunge on a single leg, unilateral movements, step downs, step ups, reverse lunges, okay? Your ability to rotate, and then your ability to press.
Yeah.
Okay? That's kind of my big, deadlifts, total body, right? Right, your lunges, you're running, essentially, but you're in place. Yeah. So you just got to look at what's specific and not overcomplicate it.
Yeah, and I think that is the best advice possible, is not to overcomplicate it. I think one of the things, one of my pet peeves is, you'll see people that are working out, everything's about aesthetics, and then you'll see like, DM me for a program. It's like, what are you gonna, high school guy or college kid, what are you gonna give these people a program of? Just something that you just ripped out of Muscle and Fitness, if that's still a magazine. And you're gonna,
it's out there.
you're gonna rip this right out. Oh yeah, okay, yeah, this is Ronnie Coleman's old workout. Yeah, okay, that'll be $50. Like, I think one of my pet peeves now, especially at this age, is looking back at my younger self. Where did most of the guys who really like to lift, where did they start in high school? Older brother taught them how to bench press, how to squat incorrectly, and now they're doing the workouts every day. They're the guy at the gym. But now I go back home and I look at those guys, and they're the ones who are all beat up and broken down because at some point the joints gave out. So I think, learning to keep it simple. I loved what you said before about learning the body weight motions, making sure that you can do pull-ups, push-ups before you're going to bench press and all that other stuff is really important.
Yeah, I mean, it's as simple as this, right? If you can't move your own body weight, then you've got some work to do before we get to the stuff where you're loaded.
Yeah.
And it's like guys, like it's specifically face-off guys. There was one thing that Greg brought up earlier, and that's the ability to like absorb impact in the face-off, and that's a huge overlooked aspect of it. Like really, you're wrestling.
Yeah.
Okay, at the end of the day, and if you want to make your training harder, and you don't want to, you're high school guys, most of you, or college guys, you're gonna want to load the barbell up. But before you get there, eccentric motion is really, really key, and that's your ability to absorb force, right? If Greg presses into me with his arm, and I can take that and then push back at him with same or equal or more force, that's eccentric strength. The ability to absorb force and then re-exert force. And I think that is, a really, really overlooked aspect by a lot of strength coaches and a lot of young athletes.
Yeah, 100% agree.
So, tempos, man.
I love it.
That'll
Andrew,
do it.
Dude, thank you so much for this conversation. For the guys who are premium subscribers, we're going to have a post game where Andrew and I are going to break down some CrossFit stories after this. But for the guys who have been listening, I want to thank you. Andrew, tell the people at home where they can find you online.
AbsoluteTraining.com. Take a look at the sweatshirt because it's spelled with an A-B-T. All right? ABT. AbsoluteTraining.com. We're in New Rochelle, New York here. You can find us Absolute Strength on Instagram. Give us a follow. Give us a call if you want to train. And thank you, Greg.
Yeah, my pleasure. Awesome. Thanks for making it official, brother.